What happens when a black single mom, calm and unassuming, boards a cross-country flight only to sit beside the billionaire who unknowingly helped erase her family's entire legacy? What if the one thing that connects them is a weathered ring on her finger? And what if that ring unlocks not just a shared past but buried truths powerful enough to bring down an empire? This is just a story about lost love. It's not just about injustice, either. It's about identity, stolen history, and the quiet strength of a woman who dares to speak when silence was safer. She was supposed to be invisible. He was never supposed to remember her. But at 36 hidden feet, memory crashes into legacy, and neither of them will land the same. Who really owns the future? When the past is built on lies, stay with us, because what starts as a simple flight becomes a reckoning decades in the making. If this story already has your heart racing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You're about to hear a story that proves truth doesn't just survive, it rises. Now let's begin. The seat next to Raina Holloway had been empty for nearly 20 minutes. She didn't mind. Silence was rare for her. In fact, she welcomed it specially today. The low hum of the engines filled the cabin as the plane leveled out over the desert sky. Flight 782 from New York to San Diego. A 5-hour stretch of air, clouds, and time she didn't have the emotional bandwidth to measure. Her fingers rested on the edge of the window shade. She hadn't pulled it up yet. The light might have shown too much the redness in her eyes, the creases in her palms, the silver ring on her left hand. The ring glinted faintly as she adjusted her seatbelt. A soft blue sapphire set in brushed metal. Simple, worn, not showy. Something that didn't match the airline uniform she wore 2 years ago, or the flight tech manuals she used to read in dim apartment corners. But it matched her. It always had. The overhead announcement buzzed softly. Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for beverage service. Turbulence ahead may delay the cart briefly. She exhaled, then glanced down at her carry-on bag. Notebooks, a printed e-ticket, a folded memorial card with her mother's photo smiling gently from the corner. It still didn't feel real. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted from the aisle. Clipped, impatient, male. "Miss, I believe there's been some kind of mistake. This is my seat." The man was dressed in a charcoal gray blazer and dark jeans, effortlessly sharp. His posture screamed tension. A platinum smartwatch blinked on his wrist. Grant Ellison? Yes, that Grant Ellison, tech mogul. The man whose AI software changed airport logistics forever. The heir to the Ellison Dynamics empire. Raina blinked slowly. Her seat was assigned. She wasn't moving. "The manifest says 21B is mine," he said again. Holding up his phone, the flight attendant approached from behind. "Sir, we're so sorry. Your original seat was double booked. We've moved you here temporarily. It's the only space available outside the crew area for now." Grant's expression stiffened, but he sat down reluctantly. "I apologize," Raina said quietly, adjusting her bag to give him more space. "It's a full flight." He offered a short nod, clearly not one for conversation. She didn't expect one. They came from different orbits. He belonged in boardrooms and behind microphones. She lived beneath deadlines, beneath bills, beneath the radar. But the world has a strange sense of symmetry. Minutes passed. He opened his laptop. She opened a protein bar. The silence settled again, but not quite as comfortably this time. Then came the bump. A brief jolt of turbulence shook the cabin. A few passengers gasped. Raina instinctively reached for the seat back in front of her. Her wrist turned as she braced, and in that moment, The ring caught the light. Grant glanced sideways and froze. Not visibly, not loudly, but something shifted in him. His fingers hovered over his keyboard. His gaze locked on the ring like it had whispered a forgotten truth. He swallowed, blinked, and turned to her slowly. "That ring," he said, almost inaudibly. "Where did you get it?" Raina looked at him, unsure how to respond. The air between them suddenly tightened. Her instinct was to tuck her hand away, but she didn't. Instead, she met his eyes. "It was my mother's," she said simply. Grant leaned back in his seat. His pulse ticked visibly at his temple. He didn't speak again for several minutes. But the damage was done. His memory had already taken over. He was 13 again, standing in the courtyard of Willow Creek Orphanage, gripping a small wood carving in one hand and watching a girl disappear down the corridor with a social worker. Shed had eyes like dusk, a quiet fire inside them, and that same blue ring on her finger, oversized on her tiny hand, but proudly worn like a secret promise. He remembered the goodbye. He remembered the guilt. And most of all, he remembered her name. Avi. His fingers closed slowly into a fist on his lap. No, it couldn't be. But what if it was? Back beside him, Raina had turned back toward the window. Her fingers now tapped rhythmically on her thigh, a quiet signal of nerves. And maybe something else. Recognition. He wasn't sure. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're expecting some light turbulence over the Rockies, but nothing to worry about. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride." Grant didn't relax. For the first time in years, he didn't want to be in control. Because if this woman really was Aviana, and if that ring really was the one he remembered, then the empire he had inherited was built on top of something broken. And the one person he had promised to return for was sitting beside him, still waiting, still unnamed, still invisible, until now. The plane jolted again, this time harder. A tray clattered in the galley. Someone 2 rows ahead cursed softly. A flight attendant steadied herself with a practiced grip on an overhead bin. Grant didn't flinch, but inside, he was rattling more violently than the cabin. He closed his laptop, fingers trembling ever so slightly. No one else would notice, but Raina did. She had always noticed things others didn't. "Still facing forward?" she asked calmly. "You afraid of flying?" A light attempt at disarming. He didn't answer right away. Then no, "I used to be, but not anymore." She nodded slightly, respectful of the space. She didn't press, but his eyes were still on her, on the ring, on the past. 25 years ago, the girl had sat on the orphanage swing set, knees muddy, fists clenched, wearing a too big sweatshirt with a faded cartoon tiger. Her hands had trembled when she showed him the ring. "It was my mama's," she'd said. "She gave it to me right before they took her away." He remembered how she wouldn't cry, no matter what. And he remembered promising swearing that when they got older, he'd find her again, that he wouldn't forget, that he wouldn't become one of them. Grant's chest tightened. He had forgotten. Until now. He turned slightly toward her, the seatbelt strap tugging at his blazer. "Raina," he began. She raised an eyebrow, slow and cautious. "Do I know you?" "Not by this name," he admitted. "I think I knew you by another." She stared at him, unmoving. His voice dropped lower. "Avi." Her breath caught. Only for a second, but enough. Then she turned back toward the window, like the world outside had something more important to say. "I don't go by that anymore," she said quietly. Grant nodded slowly. "I didn't mean to." "I know." she cut in. Her tone wasn't sharp, just closed. The cabin dimmed slightly as the sun shifted above the clouds. For a few long minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Raina said softly, "I remember you." That stopped him cold. "I wasn't sure at first," she continued, "but your eyes haven't changed. You used to carve little birds out of popsicle sticks. You gave me one before you left." Grant blinked. "A hawk," he murmured. "Yeah," she whispered, and a small, sad smile crept across her lips. "You said it meant freedom." Another bump. Passengers murmured again. The captain came on to reassure everyone. Grant exhaled. So much for smooth skies. Raina gave a quiet chuckle. Sometimes turbulence is the only thing that reminds you you're still alive. Her voice was deeper now than it had been as a child, richer with time and tired wisdom. But the undercurrent was the same. Grant studied her. What had happened to her? Where had she gone? Why had he never found her? Why had he stopped looking? The questions throbbed like wounds, just starting to reopen. "I thought you were gone," he said finally. "They told me you'd been adopted by someone in another state." "That's what the file said." "I wasn't adopted," she replied, eyes still forward. "I aged out." His jaw tightened. "Then why?" "Because no one wanted to take in a little black girl with nothing but a ring and a broken story." She turned to face him now. Her voice wasn't angry, but it was full of things she had carried alone. "For years," she said slowly, "I wondered if you remembered me. I thought about writing. Once. But then your name started showing up on magazines and billboards, and I figured maybe you weren't that boy anymore." Grant swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I am," he said honestly. She nodded. "Neither am I the girl you promised to come back for." Silence. And then, slowly, Raina pulled her carry-on from under the seat. She unzipped a small side pocket, pulled out something wrapped in a worn handkerchief, unfolded it, inside a wooden hawk. The same one, weathered but intact. "My daughter found it one day," she said softly. "Asked me why I kept such a sad-looking toy. I couldn't explain. Not then." Grant stared at it. The carving was rough, clearly made by unskilled hands, but unmistakable. It had been his. It had survived. "I can't believe you kept it." "I had so little left," she said. "I needed at least one thing to prove I hadn't imagined that someone once cared." Her voice cracked, just slightly. Grant looked away. The seatbelt light dinged again. "Please remain seated as we pass through unstable air." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Inside this cabin, a different kind of turbulence was playing out and born of decades, silence, systems, and survival. "I should have found you," Grant whispered. "You were a child," she replied. And later, a man building something you didn't know was built on stolen land. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" She turned to him fully now, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "Ellison Dynamics, Skybridge Project, the land you're breaking ground on in San Diego." He blinked. "What about it?" Her jaw clenched. "That was my family's land." Silence again. And this time, it wasn't shared. Grant's throat tightened. Raina's words echoed inside his mind like thunder in a sealed room. "That was my family's land." He turned toward her again, slower this time, more deliberate. "What are you talking about?" Raina exhaled through her nose and stared ahead. "There used to be a garden," she said, "almost dreamlike. Orchards. A shed my grandfather built with his own hands. A little spring behind the house where I used to drop rocks and pretend I was casting spells. She paused. They said it was worthless, unincorporated, too isolated to matter. Then her tone shifted sharper now, until someone came around with fancy shoes and legal papers, said we had no title, that the county seized it decades ago and the survey was outdated. Grant blinked, unsure if he was hearing her right. You're saying that land was never meant to be for Ellison Dynamics, she finished flatly. The captain's voice crackled through the cabin once again. We've begun our descent into San Diego. Please fasten your seat belts and return trays to their upright positions. Grant ignored it. His mind was already descending faster, heavier. That land was never flagged as a dispute. He murmured, It's clean on paper. Paper lies, she said, turning to him, especially when the people who write them get to decide whose voices count. He wanted to refute her, defend his company, explain how acquisitions like this work, how legal teams vet every property 5 times over. But the way she looked at him, not with hatred, worse, with knowing, with the weariness of someone who'd stopped expecting justice long ago. How did you find out? He asked, his voice low. My uncle, she said. He's a retired postal worker. Kept receipts, maps, family records from way back. After Mama passed, he showed me a box he'd buried behind his workshop. She reached into her bag again, pulled out a folded photocopy, held it out to him. He hesitated, then took it. A land survey, dated 1964. Property owner M. Holloway. Boundary notations that almost exactly matched the grid layout of the Skybridge project. He scanned it, swallowing the sour taste rising in his throat. This can't be real. It is, she said. He shook his head. This would mean the original acquisition was fraudulent, she said. Finishing his sentence, the plane lurched again, only slightly. But enough. Inside Grant, a deeper imbalance took root. His mind flashed to the celebratory press conference he was set to host the next morning. The cameras, the ribbon, the rehearsed speech about legacy and innovation, and the truth buried underneath it all. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the paper still clutched in his hands. This isn't the kind of thing I ignore, he muttered. I'm not asking you to ignore it, she said calmly. He looked up at her. Then what do you want? Raina turned slowly. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. I want it back. Grant blinked. The land he asked. No, she said. The story. Her words sank like a stone into his chest. All these years, she continued. Ellison Dynamics has told its version. How it lifted communities, brought jobs, disrupted systems. She stared him down. But I lived the version where we lost everything. Grant closed his eyes and saw her younger self again standing barefoot in a dry field with a plastic grocery bag of belongings and a ring too big for her hand. He felt his gut twist. I had no idea, he whispered. I know. She softened. Just slightly. You were a kid. Grant, you didn't take anything. But you became the man who benefited from it. The truth was simple, irrefutable, and heavy. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain interrupted, we'll be landing shortly. Please remain seated. The city began to rise beneath them through the small oval window. Buildings, roads, the glittering edge of a coastline. Somewhere down there was the land in question, her land, and the building rising from its bones. His building. Grant sat in silence as the wheels touched the runway with a muted thump. As the plane taxied toward the gate, he felt something shift in him, something he hadn't felt in years. Discomfort, doubt, a seed of shame. The seatbelt sign went off. People stirred. Phones buzzed to life. Grant remained still. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" he asked quietly. "Am attending my mother's memorial service in the morning," she replied, then heading back. "You shouldn't leave yet." "Why not?" He turned to her. "Because tomorrow I want you to come with me." She raised an eyebrow. "To the launch event." He nodded. She folded her arms. Why he didn't hesitate. "Because you deserve to be in the room when the story gets rewritten." She looked at him for a long time, then simply nodded. Not with trust, but with quiet agreement, as if to say one more time, "I'll believe you," but only once more. Outside, the gate door opened. The world waited. But inside that cabin, something far more important had already landed. The next morning came too quickly. The hotel room smelled like luxury soap and silence. Raina stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her black blouse. Her hands moved slowly, deliberate, almost reverent, the same hands that once rebuilt old airplane engines in a community college workshop. The same hands that held her mother's when the final breath came, and the same hand that still wore the sapphire ring. She stared at herself. There were no tears left, only tension, a coil in her chest that refused to unwind. Outside the window, downtown San Diego shimmered in the morning haze. Somewhere below, crowds were gathering, cameras being mounted, red carpets unfurling at the foot of something that was never theirs to build. Skybridge, the future of smart infrastructure. They called it a bridge between past and present. But no one had ever asked whose past they were standing on. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Grant not in his usual designer suit, but a simple black dress shirt, no tie. Understated, less CEO, more human. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she answered. "But I'm coming anyway." He nodded once. No argument, no platitudes. They walked together in silence down the hallway, into the elevator, into the car. Two people with history in their bones, and nothing but unfinished business between them. The Skybridge site was an architectural marvel. Glass, steel, a floating walkway that seemed to shimmer in midair. The main stage was nestled beside a large digital screen, already displaying the company's tagline, "Elevating the Future." Security let them through without question. Grant was still Grant, still the face of innovation, still the man the cameras loved. But Raina, she was invisible, just another black woman in business casual clothes. No one asked her name, and maybe that was the point. Backstage, Grant turned to her, his jaw tight. "I need you to see something before we go on." He opened his tablet and pulled up a file one he hadn't shown anyone else. A scanned document. County title transfer. Dated 1997. The signature block had been digitally signed, but something was off. He zoomed in. "See this?" Raina leaned closer. The signature read E. Holloway. "That's not my grandfather's signature," she said flatly. "He was already dead in 97. And he never used E. His name was Miles." Grant nodded. "Exactly. This signature. Forged. And the notary listed here. Never certified in this county." He tapped the next page. An internal memo. From his grandfather. "Proceed with quiet acquisition. Obscure prior title chain. Project viability depends on swift relocation of all existing references." Her breath hitched. That's what they meant by swift relocation. Not just structures. People. He nodded grimly. "They erased you." The stage manager's voice interrupted. "Mr. Ellison, we're live in 7. He glanced at Raina. "You don't have to go out there." "I know," she said. "But I will." She paused. Because someone needs to say what the blueprints don't show. When they stepped onto the stage, the applause came quick and loud. Media, investors, city officials. Grant approached the mic, cleared his throat, and waited for silence. "Thank you all for being here today," he began. "This morning, we were set to celebrate a leap forward. But before we do, there's something I need to say." He motioned to Raina. Cameras turned. Whispers rippled. "I'd like to introduce Raina Holloway," he continued, "whose story has been buried beneath this project, quite literally. And today, it's time we tell it." She stepped forward. Not polished, not rehearsed, but solid, unshaken. "My name is Raina Holloway," she began. "This land, before it was scanned and zoned and sectioned off, was my family's home. My grandfather planted citrus trees here. My mother was born in a wooden house just 200 yards from where you're sitting." She paused, letting it sink in. 25 years ago, we were told the land was seized by the county, that we had no right to stay, that the paperwork was final. Another pause. Her voice dropped. But the paperwork lied. She pulled a folder from her bag and held it up. "These documents show forged signatures, falsified transfers, and coordinated erasure." Silence. Grant stepped up beside her again. "This project cannot go forward," he said. "Gasp," he continued, voice steady. "Not until we've reconciled its foundation. With full transparency, full investigation, and reparative action, including returning title to the Holloway family and redesignating this zone for community use." Reporters were already shouting questions. Grant raised a hand. "No further comment today." "Well, let the evidence speak." They walked off stage together, the noise growing behind them. Raina's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't let go of the folder. Grant looked at her. "You okay, no?" she replied again. "But I think I'm finally seen." Later that afternoon, alone in the city park behind the old courthouse, they sat on a bench surrounded by quiet. "I've spent years building something I thought would define me," Grant said. "But now you're not sure who you are." Raina finished. He nodded. "Feels like someone else's name is stamped on my life." Raina looked up at the trees. "Maybe that's the moment you stop living their legacy and start writing your own." He smiled faintly. "Would you help me?" She didn't answer right away. Then we'll see. And for the first time in years, something in both of them began to loosen. The boardroom was colder than it should have been. Not in temperature, but in presence. Grant stood alone at the head of the Ellison Dynamics executive table. The room curved like a glass shell above the skyline, sunlight flooding the polished floor. But the light felt sterile, clinical, like it couldn't reach deep enough to warm what had frozen inside this place. He waited. 5 empty chairs slowly filled, attorneys, PR heads, his chief of operations, then last moving slowly, leaning on a Kane Harlan Ellison, founder of the empire, his grandfather. Sharp eyes, pressed suit, thin smile, carved from decades of winning battles behind closed doors. "So," Harlan said, lowering himself into the chair, "you've caused quite the spectacle." Grant didn't respond. He slid the folder across the table, the one Raina had held on stage. His voice was quiet. "Did you forge it yourself?" Harlan didn't even blink. "Of course not. That's what lawyers are for." A cold silence fell over the room. "You falsified the land transfer," Grant continued. "You erased a family legacy to build a showroom for profit." Harlan tilted his head, feigning thought. "It was undeveloped land, unproductive. It served no one. It wasn't yours. Then whose was it?" Grant, his tone sharpened. Some woman with no deed and a sob story. Is that where we are now? Letting emotions dictate ownership. Grant's hands balled into fists at his sides. She wasn't just some woman. She was nothing. Harlan snapped. Until you gave her a microphone. He leaned forward. You let her make you feel guilty for decisions you didn't make. That's weakness. That's sentiment. It's truth, Grant said. Voice rising. It's leverage, Harlan countered. And you just handed it to the public. One of the legal advisors cleared his throat. If the media narrative continues, he said, we're looking at a full audit of the Skybridge initiative. Potential lawsuits. Investor withdrawal. He'll survive that, Grant replied flatly. I'm not sure the company will. The man returned. Harlan stood now, walked to the window with slow steps. Then, almost conversationally, you think you're doing something noble. I understand. You're still young enough to believe in integrity. He turned. But here's the truth you don't want to face. He pointed at Grant. You don't even belong here. The words landed like stones. Grant blinked. What are you talking about? You think I brought you into this family out of love? Harlan asked. You were an orphan. Convenient. Your file was clean. Your smile photogenic. You were easy to mold. Grant took a step back, breath leaving him. That story about your parents. The boating accident. Harlan sneered. It happened. Just not to your parents. The room fell into a stunned hush. You weren't our blood, Harlan continued. You were a replacement. The heir we lost. The child I needed. And now, you want to burn the house down over some handwritten map and a ring. Grant staggered into the nearest chair. His vision blurred. For years, he had played the role of the polished grandson, the visionary, the next Ellison. And all this time, he had been an image, not an heir. Then something strange happened. In that moment of broken identity, he felt free. Then I owe you nothing, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was final. I'm not your legacy. I'm not your puppet. He stood up again, taller now than before. And I'm not the boy who owes you for being rescued. I'm the man who will make this right. He left the boardroom without another word. Later that night, Grant sat alone on a park bench just outside the Skybridge perimeter. Streetlights buzzed. A slight fog rolled in from the coast. In his hand, he held a carved wooden hawket's wings worn from decades of travel. He turned it over slowly, remembering how small it had once felt in his palm, how full of hope. Now it felt different, still hopeful, but heavier. Raina approached quietly. He didn't turn, but he felt her presence. Is it true, she asked softly? He nodded. I'm not an Ellison by blood, not by birth, just paperwork. Raina exhaled, sat beside him. For a while, they said nothing. Then she spoke. Maybe that's not a bad thing. He looked at her. You have a choice now, she said. To rebuild something better. Something real. Grant turned the hawk one more time, then looked at her fully. What if I'm not enough? Raina smiled gently. You were enough for me, she said. Back then, when I had nothing, you showed up, even for a little while. And now she paused. Now, I think we both get to decide who we become. The city lights blinked in the distance. Somewhere behind them, a dynasty had started to crumble. But ahead, something far better was waiting to rise. 6 months later, the land looked nothing like it used to. Gone were the metal beams, the concrete skeletons, the flashy billboards of the Skybridge project. In their place stood something quieter, truer. A sun-washed building with wide windows and bright murals painted by local children. A small learning garden grew at the edge of the lot, where once demolition had loomed. Inside, a workshop buzzed with soft drills and laughter. On the front sign, in block letters, the Holloway Center for Aviation and Applied Trades, a place to rebuild from the ground up. Raina walked through the corridor, clipboard in hand, grease on her sleeves. She nodded to two teens tightening bolts on a metal frame. Steady pressure, she called. Let the wrench do the work. You're not fighting it. You're guiding it. They grinned. She smiled back. The smile wasn't just polite now. It was real. In her office, tucked between flight manuals and class schedules, sat a small wooden hawk mounted carefully in a display case. Next to it, the sapphire ring, now worn only for ceremonies. She had passed its story down to every student who asked, and some who didn't but needed it anyway, because the story was no longer just hers. It was theirs. A knock on her office door. She looked up. Grant stood there, holding 2 coffees. You still drink it black? Right, he asked. Unless someone's trying to flirt? Then I might ask for vanilla oat milk, she replied, deadpan. He smirked. Black it is. She took the cup, nodding her thanks. He sat across from her, glancing around the space. You've built something, he said softly. So did you, she answered. He gave a short laugh. I'm just a quiet donor now. The real work happens here. She raised an eyebrow. You turned over all Skybridge assets to a trust. You resigned from the company. You even took back your birth name. That's not quiet. That's change. He looked down at his hands. They were no longer manicured and still like a CEO's. They had calluses now from helping rebuild, from showing up. I finally feel like myself, he said. She nodded. You look it. Outside the window, children in bright overalls tested a drone they'd built from salvaged parts. One of them shrieked with joy as it took off, nearly clipping a tree branch. Raina smiled at the sound. Grant watched her, then said carefully, Do you ever regret it? Regret what confronting it all? The past? Me? She paused, then shook her head. No. She sipped her coffee. I regret waiting so long to believe I had the right to speak. I regret letting silence sit where truth belonged. Her gaze met his. But you helped me change that. And maybe, just maybe I helped you too. He leaned back, hands behind his head. The sun caught the edge of the hawk carving in the case. You know, he said, I used to think that legacy was about making people remember your name. And now I think it's about who gets to write their story in ink instead of pencil. They sat like that for a long time, 2 people once lost in the same past, now steady in the same future. That evening, as Raina walked alone through the community garden, she passed a small plaque recently installed beneath a blooming magnolia tree. She paused, knelt, ran her fingers over the engraving. To Eleanor Holloway, whose strength planted roots deeper than any title, deed ever could. She closed her eyes. I told our story. Mama, she whispered. We're not invisible anymore. Somewhere behind her, the kids were laughing again. Somewhere ahead of her, there was still more work to do. But for now, for this moment, she let herself feel it. Peace, not perfect, but honest, earned, and rising. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes when a woman who is silenced finds her voice. When a ring passed through generations becomes more powerful than a billion-dollar name. And when someone finally chooses truth over legacy. Raina Holloway was never meant to be remembered, but she chose to rebuild on the very ground where her family was erased. Grant Ellison was never told who he truly was, but he chose to walk away from a name built on silence and stand with the truth instead. This is just their story. It's the story of anyone who's ever been underestimated because of their background, their skin, or where they came from. Let this be a reminder. Erased histories deserve to be reclaimed. Quiet voices deserve to be heard. And know why no one deserves to be invisible. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you feel seen, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We tell stories that others try to bury, and we're just getting started. Stay with us for the next story that proves the truth will always rise.